My name is Elizabeth, your host for today's Zone 7 gardening presentation on evergreen shrubs. These Zone 7 gardening virtual plant clinic series highlight native and other plants suited to grow well in our Mid-Atlantic USDA Hardiness Zone 7 gardens. These series of clinics are sponsored by the Virginia Cooperative Extension program of Virginia's two land-grant universities, Virginia Tech and Virginia State University. Okay, for today's program, we will begin with what's blooming now. And Barbara will share with us what is currently blooming in our Zone 7 gardens. Zig Zag Goldenrod, a seasonal favorite you can see everywhere at this time of year. Over to you, Barbara.
Thank you. All right, so today we're going to talk about Solidago flexicalis and a little bit about this plant. So this plant is called the Zig Zag Goldenrod because the thin, wiry stem zigs and zags back and forth, which you can see on the right side here in this photo. And it changes the direction at each node. So the node is the leaf attachment point. This plant is in the aster family and in the goldenrod genus. Its natural range is colored on the left-hand side there. It's from Quebec and Ontario in Canada down to Louisiana in the southern US. It's very common in the mountains in Virginia. It's infrequent in the Piedmont area of the state, and it's pretty rare and restricted to certain areas in our coastal plain. Zig Zag Goldenrod is a 1 to 3 foot tall perennial. It's very low maintenance and it's a moderate grower, so it's not very aggressive. One thing that I found interesting is that it propagates by root or seed. The seed spreads by light hairs when I was really trying to find a photo of that, but I couldn't find one, but it sounded really interesting. So Solidago flexicalis is the most shade tolerant of all goldenrods. It prefers medium to dry and well-drained soil, but it will tolerate sandy and clay soils. It has also been found to tolerate the toxic secretions of black walnut trees, and it's hardy in zones 3 through 8, which covers its natural range that we spoke about in the last slide. Zig Zag Goldenrod has broad, coarse leaves, and they have serrated edges. And it has these spike-like flower clusters that you can see in the left-hand picture on this slide. These spiky clusters and its growth in partial shade help distinguish this species from other goldenrods that you might see. Zig Zag Goldenrod flowers August through October, so you can see this now in our area. The flower is a brilliant yellow with the flowers in small clusters where the leaves attach to the stem. Now that we know a bit about its habitat and blooms, let's talk about the benefits to wildlife or insects and pollinators. So Solidago flexicalis has many benefits, which I've grouped into 3 areas here. As I mentioned before, it can also tolerate part shade, so it really is well suited for a variety of conservation uses. It's well suited for rain gardens, biofiltration plantings, native gardens, slope stabilizations, and deciduous forest restorations. Its predictable late summer blooms add lots of interest, color, and texture to any area. For wildlife, Solidago flexicalis flowers attract and serve bees, butterflies, and even flies and wasps. And the seeds are consumed by pine siskins, they kind of look like a goldfinch, and swamp sparrows. And the foliage can tolerate deer browsing. Solidago flexicalis also has some ethnobotanical uses. I did find some citations that Native Americans and other people across the globe use the roots and leaves for medicinal uses, which may explain the origin of the name, which means to make whole. And finally, I'll leave you with something that all of us allergy sufferers might be interested in. Goldenrods in general are accused of causing lots of allergies. However, allergic reactions at the time of the goldenrod bloom are actually caused by other plants that bloom at the same time, such as common ragweed and many different grasses. So don't blame the showy Solidago flexicalis on your next allergy attack. And instead, you may think about using this pretty plant somewhere on your property for one of its many uses. And with that, here are my references for the presentation, and that is what I have for you today.
Thank you, Barbara. A goldenrod is so prolific during September, and now we know what it is. Next, let's turn our topic to today. The topic for today's virtual plant clinic, evergreen shrubs, with Leslie and Sonia. Over to you, Leslie, for part 1 on boxwood.
Hi, I'm going to talk today about boxwoods, which are very common. I was walking through the neighborhood over the weekend and everybody has boxwoods. It is a deer-resistant evergreen shrub. It's not native to this area. It's native to Western and Southern Europe, Western Asia, and Northern Africa. But it does quite well here if it doesn't get sick. So we'll discuss some of the things that it can get later. It's a multi-branched, low maintenance, wide spreading plant. The leaves are opposite, oblong to oval in shape, and they're dark green above with a lighter green to yellow green underneath. They're shiny and kind of firm to the touch. The stems are square and winged, and there are very many varieties. Some are very small, some are very large. Some of the big ones can grow up to 15 to 20 feet, but you can also keep some of the larger ones small by pruning. So, and I'll get to that too. Pruning is very important with these shrubs. It prefers well-drained soil, so don't plant it in your rain gardens or near your downspouts where it'll be wet for long periods of time. It doesn't like wet feet. The best soil pH is between 6.5 and 7.2. It prefers afternoon shade and it needs protection against wind and winter sun, since these can cause dehydration and bronzing of the leaves. And the bronzing can make you think that it has other illnesses too. So sometimes you have to let it recover from the winter to make sure you don't have a fungal disease going on too. So it's really important that you mulch it lightly. You don't want to mulch these plants really heavily, but you do want to give it a little bit of mulch to keep the roots cool and a little bit damp. You don't want them to dry out too much. But if you go too deep, it's all about keeping like air in these plants to keep them healthy. You want to make sure they're thinned out. You don't want them damp all the time because they are prone to getting fungal diseases. And the voles tend to like really heavy mulch. If you have a vole problem in your yard, then if you mulch it too heavy, they'll eat the roots. Fertilize only if your soil test indicates this. So you should test your soil around this every 3 to 4 years just to make sure you're not under fertilizing or over fertilizing. And then water at intervals if the rainfall is less than an inch per week. And pruning is really important for care. And after I researched this, I went out and pruned mine. So you need to thin the branches annually. And this means like take your clippers and go down to where they attach at the base and thin it out. So like especially cut your dead branches out, but also thin it so there's air movement between the different branches, and so there will be light there too. If you notice that your bushes are looking sparse in between, it's because they don't have enough light and air circulation. So the best time to do this is in the winter between December and February, but the temperature needs to be above freezing when you do this. So again, your thick foliage encourages fungal diseases. So you just want to make sure that it's not surrounded by other plants that could be keeping the moisture in. If you want to shear it, if you want to do your topiaries or you're keeping it into a certain size, do that in early June, not in the late summer, which may force your new growth because this won't harden before the frost. So, and then to restore your overgrown boxwoods, if you have some that are just looking pretty sparse in the middle, you can cut them way back early in the late winter. You want to, if it's a huge bush, just do half of it one year and the other half the next year, but you can get new growth on these plants and they'll look better if you want to prune them way back if they're looking really terrible. So they can be used in many ways. There's many cultivars of these. You can use them as a foundation plant. You can grow them large and use them as a screen. You can use it as a framework for formal gardens. This is like your typical English gardens were made up of your boxwoods. And then they plant the little, all your roses and stuff in between. They're used to outline terraces, walkways, and planter boxes, and again, as your topiaries. There's many cultivars. They can be prostrate, globes, weeping, columnar, and pyramidal. And for example, your Buxus Cynthia variety insularis is your wintergreen, which is a low, slow-growing, nice green shrub. Your Buxus microphylla variation japonica is your slow-growing, about 3 to 4 feet, and the Buxus sempervirens variation angustifolia has your largest leaves and is tree-like. Okay, again, there are quite a few diseases that the boxwood can get. I honestly haven't done much with my boxwoods. I know that I had some of these before and it didn't kill it. So they are pretty hardy until it gets too infected. So just, do take care of it, but they are pretty hardy. One of them is the volutella stem blight or canker. And these, the leaves on the infected branches will lose their green color and fade, and you'll get these salmon pink fruiting body, the leaves. And again, you want to thin your branches and remove your diseased leaves. And you want to remove the diseased leaves around the base of the plant too. You don't want those to stay on the ground because that can reinfect your plant. Root rot was your Phytophthora. Again, as a water drainage issue, avoid planting in compacted soils or where your water collects. So again, don't plant by the drain spouts. The macrophoma leaf spot, the Dothiorella candolii causes tiny black raised fruiting bodies on dying or dead straw colored leaves. Again, manage this by pruning, rake up all your leaves, get some air to the plant so there's circulation. And then again, your voles can damage the boxwoods by girdling the base of the plant and feeding on the roots. So don't over mulch your plants and weed in between the plants too. And I guess you can catch them if you want to do that too. Encourage owls. How's that? And these are just some examples of some of the diseases that we see. Another one that I wanted to talk to you about is the boxwood blight, which we'll talk about in a minute. And that's a newer disease that was introduced and is decimating some of these boxwoods. It's really hard to get rid of. So I'll talk about that in a minute. The insects that you need to worry about are the leaf miners, which they're larvae that feed on the tissue between the surfaces of the leaves. And you'll get these. I had this actually one time, and I looked out at my boxwoods and I had all these little insects flying everywhere, and they're little, you get these little like tunnels on the underside of the leaves. And I got rid of it with safer, like this insecticide soap that got rid of it. But it looked like my plants were alive with bugs. It was kind of crazy. So the boxwood mite are yellow to red mites on the plants, and they are pretty prolific. They'll have 5 to 6 generations in a season, which can cause fine stippling on the leaves. And then your oyster shell scale will cover bark on wilting or dead branches. And all these you can treat with a horticultural oil or insecticidal soap and pruning away the dead or dying branches. I would say most of these don't necessarily kill the plant unless it's overwhelming, but do look for it if you have a section of the bush that's not doing well. So the boxwood blight is the newest disease that affects these plants, and it's caused by Calanectria pseudonaveiculata. And it was introduced in 2011 in Virginia, and it's causing really bad defoliation and decline of some of these old boxwoods in Virginia. It's almost impossible to control with fungicides. It's spread by contaminated plant material. You can spread it on your clothes, you can spread it on your pruning tools, your equipment, anything that can come in contact with an infected plant. And also greenery from the Christmas greenery can also have it, and you can introduce it to your shrubbery from Christmas greenery. So be careful, like I would just avoid buying anything boxwood at Christmas for decorations. It will appear as a brown leaf spot, and then just the whole plant will defoliate. And the way you can tell that it has it is there'll be black streaks on the stem tissue. If you suspect that you have boxwood blight, you want to take a sample and double bag it, put it in 2 Ziploc bags and get it to the extension office. We are collecting them at plant clinics. So if you know that there's a plant clinic at the farmer's market, we can take it in and have you fill out a form. You want to remove the diseased boxwoods immediately to prevent further spread and the leaf debris. But it will stay in the soil for 5 to 6 years, and it can infect any replacement boxwoods. So there are some species of boxwoods that are a little bit more resistant. So you can plant those and hopefully not get reinfected. And I'll go over some other plants that you could plant instead, that if you just want to throw in the towel and not plant boxwoods, then you can do that too. So again, avoid using boxwood holiday greenery. You want to monitor your boxwoods on a regular basis for symptoms, and make sure your nursery is reputable. They should be aware of the disease, and your lawn service people, if you have people taking care of your bushes and your lawns, make sure that they have an idea of what this disease is, so they're not spreading it inadvertently to your bushes too. These are the more resistant plants: Buxus microphylla, which is the golden dream, the Buxus harlandia, the Buxus sinica vera insularis, which is also called the nana, and the Buxus microphylla variation japonica, which is the green beauty. And I just copied down a couple that if you didn't want to plant any of those, inkberry, which we're going to talk about soon, is a good substitute. The box honeysuckle, or Lonicera nitida, is a good one too. That one's not native. The inkberry is native. The Japanese holly, which is another non-native, is a good substitute. The Hicks yew and the little Simon arborvitae, and the Teton firethorn, which is a Pyracantha teton. Those are all good foundation plants that, if you don't want to risk planting a boxwood right now, those are good varieties to plant instead of the boxwood. And these are the references. There's actually a good sheet from the University of Maryland. This one has a really good sheet and it lists all the symptoms that you could have on your plant, and it will tell you the possible causes. So it will say like leaf yellowing with tiny black spots on leaves, and the possible cause would be microphoma leaf spot. So that's a good resource if you have some questionable things going on with your boxwoods. So. The Virginia Cooperative Extension has a very good boxwood blight task force. They have a lot of information on this website here, all about the boxwood blight. So if you have any questions about it, I would check with this first. It tells you, where to send samples, how to deal with it all, how to try to clean up after it. So that's a really good resource right there.
Thank you, Leslie, for providing all that information on boxwood, especially the boxwood blight. Boxwoods are a traditional and favorite shrub in Virginia, but with the boxwood blight, we may want to think about using them. And for that reason, we have part 2 of evergreen shrubs. And Sonia will share information on inkberry. Over to you, Sonia.
Yes, so the inkberry shrub, pronounced Ilex glabra, has many names. that have been used as common names. One is the Appalachian tea or the gallberry. Native Americans used to use the dried and roasted leaves as a tea, and they called it Appalachian tea. It's a low-growing, upright, rounded, broadleaf evergreen shrub in the holly family. There's different cultivars have different growth sizes, but it can be up to 10 feet tall, can also spread 10 feet. And it spreads by root suckers to form colonies. The plant flourishes along the coastal plain from Nova Scotia to Florida and as far west as Louisiana. The growing conditions, it can grow anywhere from full sun to shade, needs 2 to 6 hours of sunshine a day, needs clay and sand soil with an acidic pH of 6, needs good drainage, but occasionally it can tolerate wet water and moist soil. You should plant the short shrubs 3 to 6 feet apart and the tall ones 6 to 12 feet apart. It is a flammable bush, so you have to keep that in mind when you plant it. If you want the berries, you need to have a male inkberry, but you can have one male for several female plants, and then that way you can get the blackberries. The benefits of the inkberry, it produces the honey that the bees produce from the inkberry flowers is supposed to be very, very good. It's very popular in the South, apparently. They are pollinated by bees. The berries are eaten by birds in the winter. They're fairly resistant to both deer and rabbits, so deer will come along and graze on it if they choose to, as deer often do. It's the wildlife value. It provides nectar for pollinators and specialized bees. The larva host plant for Henry's elfin larva, source of nectar for Henry's elfin adult butterflies. Many species of birds eat the fruit. Again, the leaves can be eaten by the deer, serves as a cover plant for deer and other birds, so it's a protective habitat. Diseases and pests. The leaf spot can be an occasional problem, and it's susceptible to chlorosis, which is the yellow leaves if planted in alkaline soil, prone to phytophthora root rot if the soil is too wet, and susceptible to many reported pests of hollies in the southeastern United States, the holly leaf miner, Japanese wax scale, and southern red mites. They're slow growing and low maintenance. They're good in butterfly gardens, children's garden, edible garden, pollinator garden, and winter garden. Resistant to landscape challenges, erosion, pollution, rabbits, salt, and wet soil. Propagates through root suckers, and so you can remove those if the growth is undesired. Over time, the close shape will open with age, so to help that, you can prune to shape it in the early spring just before new growth begins. Plants generally need minimal pruning unless you're using them in a hedge. Cultivars and varieties. There's gem box, which is dwarf female, dense and ball shaped, which is a good one for an alternative to boxwood. Niagara, which is similar to shamrock, and the shamrock, which is compact, goes only to 3 to 5 feet. Strong box is mounded and dense female, resistant to pests and disease, and that's also a good boxwood alternative. And here's the references.
Thank you, Sonia. So many benefits to the wildlife, and you get honey too. Moving on. September is a very busy month in your garden. And so here are a few tips that will help you prioritize your work and get the most out of what's left of our lingering summer. You want to plant your winter salad, plant hardy greens outside and others in a cold frame. Harvest your lettuce crop that you might have planted in August. Harvest your herbs before frost. Wash thoroughly, dry, and store in a freezer bag and freeze for later use. Fertilize your lawn. Divide crowded perennials and replant where there's more space. And then you have the big job of cleaning up the garden, removing the dead plants, the debris, and the weeds. You want to prune your evergreen trees and shrubs. And then as your reward, plant pansies in full for color in the cooler months. You may want to check out the Fairfax Gardening website. It's the URL is circled, and you can subscribe by email to receive notices when our site is updated. Follow us on Instagram, Fairfax Master Gardeners. Search for monthly garden articles and advice at our website. Fairfax County has a YouTube channel, VCE-Fairfax County YouTube, in your browser. We have held these informative sessions going into our second year, and we've been recording them. Check out past presentations from our virtual plant clinics on the VCE-Fairfax County YouTube website. Thank you for attending, and happy gardening. Hope to see you again at a future plant clinic as we talk about seasonal gardening topics.